Every point spread, every total, every game. Here's all that you need to know before making a bet in NFL week number 3. Let's start off with Thursday night football. New England on the road to take on the New York Jets. New York, a 6-point favorite currently. Total in this game, 38.5. We released the Jets at -6, and that's a number that's still available and one that I certainly agree with. When I look at this game, I'm looking at the New York Jets playing in an absolutely massive home game for the point of their season where the strength of schedule gets so ugly as you get into the latter portion of October and into November that this is the window where they need to be stacking wins. And this game at home is absolutely crucial because of the 49ers loss that set the season off in a bad way. And so you get the win on the road at Tennessee, where in many ways you escape with it, but now it's the return home. I think back to week 1 last year and how electric that Jets crowd was. And it's going to be very similar hosting the New England Patriots. And to me, the Pats are coming in a very different mindset. They get the surprise shock win in week 1. They go to overtime with Seattle. And it's now kind of that down-to-earth game or coming back to the level we kind of anticipated from New England entering the season. And so I do think things level out here. As I'm looking at the number of 6, I see a number here that I made on the other side of 7 preseason. A lot of different ratings that I look at in aggregate spots would have made this game on the other side of 7. And to me, the Jets have been adjusted down a little bit too much. And I think that largely has been driven by the competition that they have played. The 49ers defense looked much better than expected. And the Tennessee Titans quietly have a very good run defense up front. And so to me, this is a game that's going to be solely on the shoulders of Aaron Rodgers. It's going to be a bit of change in identity for the New York Jets, who came into the year, they wanted to run the football as much as possible. They wanted to rely on the offensive line. And it didn't work against San Francisco. It didn't work against Tennessee, as the Jets are dead last in yards before contact on rushes and carries by running backs. And so last week, I think, was a good example of Seattle going into Foxborough, a team that was down their best running back, a team that has offensive line issues as well. They just elected to not even try run the football. And they had Geno drop back 44 times to throw against this New England Patriots secondary. And wherever Christian Gonzalez was, Seattle just threw away from that and had a lot of success doing it. And so I think the Jets come into this game, perhaps go away from the run a little bit more than what we've seen in weeks 1 and 2. It's a more pass-happy attack from Aaron Rodgers, letting him dictate the game at the line of scrimmage. It's going to be Gonzalez on Wilson, and then it's going to be Rodgers throwing off of that, and the Jets trying to open up Wilson. I think the backs are going to be involved in the passing game too. And so I like the way that this is setting up for the Jets in this home game. I think the Pats come down to earth a little bit, and we see the Jets get out to a win and cover on Thursday Night Football to start the week. As I mentioned, we released that side. If I'm looking at the total, not much of an opinion there. I would have a very small lean to the over at 38.5, just on the heels of the Jets pass attack being likely more involved in this game. But I can't help but watch the Patriots pressers with Gerard Mayo, other reporters who are covering the team, their commentary. Mayo's really trying to push the pass game for New England. He wants to throw more in this spot. He wants to get the downfield attack going. I don't necessarily buy that they can do it. I know the Alex Van Pelt offense wants that to happen, but in this spot, it looks like Reed is going to be back in the secondary. Michael Carter is also scheduled to play after a full practice yesterday. So the Jets get some secondary reinforcements back. And I'm just not buying as much as there seems to be optimism about Pop Douglas breaking out in this spot. I think it's going to be maybe a little bit more contained. But just off of that notion and what the Pats want to do, I would kind of have a very small lean here to the over at 38.5. LA Chargers on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Steelers 1.5-point favorites. Total in this game, lowest of the week and lowest of the season at 35.5. The Chargers stayed out east. It's been a extra long road trip for them after playing in Carolina. They elected not to travel back home. So it's been full prep for the Chargers on this game going into Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh's home opener in this spot, and the market has leaned towards the Chargers. I don't necessarily agree with that. And in this spot, I would have a small lean to the Steelers at -1.5. I know it's painful to try sort of think about backing Justin Fields as the Steelers prepared to have him out there on the field. But I think this Steelers defense is going to be quite a shock to the Chargers offense. They've been incredibly run heavy and run dependent in the new Greg Roman offense so far through 2 weeks. But this is a Steelers defense and a Steelers coaching staff that is very familiar with the Greg Roman scheme from his time in the AFC North. They had a ton of success against it between 2019 and 2022 when Roman was the OC with the Baltimore Ravens. And quite frankly, that Ravens offense had a lot better pieces and a lot better weapons than what the Chargers offense has. And we're starting to see a lot of these week 2 metric charts come out, and the Chargers are right at the top of all of them, but also the Saints are right at the top of all of them. And that's partly due to the fact that both of these teams have played the Carolina Panthers in week 1 or 2, and teams that have played the Panthers have seen their numbers just shoot through the roof for offensive efficiency, for run game efficiency. And that's just not going to be the case against this Steelers defense, which has that familiarity, but is also a much better unit than both the Raiders and the Panthers. I mean, through 2 weeks, the Chargers offense has got whatever they wanted, got it their way, but they've played a Raiders run defense, which is below average, and a Panthers run defense that looks like the worst in the NFL. And so the Steelers are not that. The Steelers are going to be great against the run all season. They have through 2 weeks. This is going to be a big step up for the Chargers. And I just don't believe that they have the secondary weapons when they're going to be forced into passing to find sustained drives through the pass game. I'm not worried about the Herbert injury. I'm just worried about the lack of wide receivers that they have out there against the Steelers secondary. And so to me, this is a bit of a tricky spot with the second road game and the extended road trip. It's a much bigger step up in class for opposing defense. And I think that bodes pretty well for the Steelers, especially with the familiarity. Justin Fields is needed to score 7 and 13 points to get his 2 wins. They have 1 offensive touchdown. To me, the Chargers secondary is still a unit that I feel can be exploited. Is Justin Fields the quarterback to do that to a big extent? Probably not. But I do think in this game specifically, the Steelers are going to be able to do enough offensively to just win an ugly game at home in their home opener. And it's not going to be pretty, and that's why we see the total at 35.5. But I like the Steelers here with that familiarity in a game that's going to be led by their defense. No opinion for me on the total at 35.5. That would be a pass for me. Chicago on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Colts a 1.5-point home favorite. Total in this game 43.5. My lean here would definitely be to the over at 43.5. I look at the Chicago Bears coming into Indy, and they are going to face a defense that is a big step back in class. We talked about the Chargers stepping up in class. This is the Bears taking a big step back. So Sunday Night Football going into Houston. I mean, that's a brutal spot, and that's going to be a tough spot for any quarterback all season. And the Texans just threw a bit of a wrinkle, but they have so much talent that they didn't even have to respect the Bears' offensive line. It was a crazy high blitz rate. It was a crazy high rate of man coverage. That's an elite Texans defense, and the Bears just simply weren't prepared for it. So you have that element where now the Bears coming into Indy, this is going to be the first game that we see a competent performance from Caleb Williams and a competent Bears offense to an extent that can move the football, because the Colts now have DeForest Buckner, their best interior defender, on IR. They lost their best corner in Juju Brents last week. Other guys banged up in the middle of this Colts defense. And so I believe the Bears are going to find some room in the run game, but also I feel like they're going to have the ability to throw the football with some success for the first time all season. There is an outside chance that Keenan Allen will be back for the Bears offense too. That would be a massive help if that comes through and he is able to play in this game, even if it is in a limited fashion. But just the level of defense that the Bears are going to be facing after looking so bad in week 1 and 2, I feel like this has been a bit of an overreaction, as we've seen the total from the look ahead at 46.5 drop all the way down to 43.5. So that's a big jump where you have the Bears that will have some offensive success. The Colts on the other side, I'm a little bit confused about the first 2 weeks of what they've done offensively. I see Anthony Richardson throwing much more than expected. The depth of target has been pretty extreme downfield. They've kind of got away from the RPO game that they talked so much about in the offseason coming in. It just hasn't been a dominating factor. This is a Colts team that I fully expected to dominate the line of scrimmage, to run a lot, to work off of the RPOs and make things easy. And they've just kind of elected to do the exact opposite. Jonathan Taylor was benched last game in the fourth quarter against the Green Bay Packers. I'm not really sure what to make of it. To me, in this game, they have to get back to that run game, which is going to be dominant. And I would be very surprised if it's another 60% plus pass rate game. That to me just wouldn't make sense in this matchup. I also look at the Colts here and wonder how much that game against the Packers kind of suppressed things overall, because the Packers ran the football 54 times. Anytime you get a matchup like that, it suppresses the totals coming up, certainly. But that was much more a game that finished 16-10 and stayed way under, that was dictated by the Packers, than what the Colts were doing on offense. And there were some untimely turnovers for Richardson in plus territory that took points off the board. On a play-by-play basis, the Colts were moving the football relatively well. And so in this matchup against the Bears defense, I think it's going to be a game that has a bit more tempo and a bit more ability to finish some of those drives than what they were facing against that Packers game, which just got really weird really, really quickly with some fluky red zone stuff and some turnovers in plus territory. So I look at this game, lean over 43.5. I would also lean very slightly to the Bears here, getting 1.5 points. Houston, -2.5 on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. Total in this game is 46. Very, very small lean for me here for Houston, -2.5. I look at this game that was 4.5 on the look ahead, adjusted through the 3. Surprised to see this isn't Houston -3. A big part of this and why this number is where it is because we saw pro money very much support the Minnesota Vikings last week against the 49ers. And we saw pro money very much support the Chicago Bears against the Houston Texans. So not only did you have the Vikings outperform expectation as they were 4.5-point dogs, but you had that pro money supporting them. That carries over to this week. And then you had the Texans not able to cover against the Chicago Bears, but you had the money against them. That also carries. So you have a lot of things kind of working in here. But to me, getting below 3 here is a pretty big adjustment. And I like what Kevin O'Connell has done play calling wise. I like how Sam Darnold has looked. But this, to me, is a tough spot against this DeMeco Ryans defense that we just saw dominate another young quarterback. I know Darnold is not a young quarterback in the sense of age, but in this system. And I just can't help but feel we see another Texans performance on the defensive side, especially with Justin Jefferson. He has the quad contusion. He's going to play. I don't know if he's going to be fully 100%. And I just feel like the Vikings performance against the 49ers, with the big touchdown play for 97 yards, with some of the short fields that set them up for short scores off of 49ers turnovers, just lended itself to a Vikings game that played out probably more favorably for them than what the box score and play-by-play data would have suggested. And to me, Houston in that game against Chicago, even in that spot where the money was coming against them, like you watch over the course of the game, and that game and Houston not covering was far more about mistakes that they made than it was them getting outplayed by the Chicago Bears in any sense on either side of the football. And so I just can't help but look at this adjustment up in favor of Minnesota and how extreme it has been, and they're bumping the rating to kind of see like Minnesota went from the surprise team preseason, had the big week 1 against the Giants where everything came easy. You get a little bit of a few breaks going your way in the game against the 49ers. Now it's ratcheted up, and you have a Texans team that, quite frankly, I would say at almost every position rates out or grades out higher than what the Vikings have on the field. So for me, it's just an adjustment that's gone too much. So I would have that small lean here to Houston at 2.5. So I feel that 3 would be the better number in this game. New York Giants on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Browns laying 6 at home with a total of 39. Looking here at Cleveland, I think this is short at 6. Better number for me here would be -7. So I have a lean to Cleveland at 6. No opinion on this total at 39. So Daniel Jones faced the Brian Flores defense in week 1 that was very aggressive, very blitz heavy. The Giants offense looked horrendous. Last week against Washington, it was a layup spot for Daniel Jones and the Giants offense against that Commanders secondary, which is so bad. And still they find a way to lose that game, and they score 3 touchdowns but end up with 18 points. It's just, I don't know what we're waiting to see from this offense for Daniel Jones. And now it's a road game to take on this Jim Schwartz defense in Cleveland, which is a better, more aggressive version of what Daniel Jones and the Giants couldn't move the football on in week 1. And I don't have any reason to expect this to be different in week 3 on the road. I feel like this is a big step up and a challenge that the Giants don't have the personnel to overcome. If the Browns are able to man up with Malik Neighbors and get one of their elite corners on him and eliminate him from this offense, there's not much here. The Giants are not going into Cleveland and winning a game with Singletary keeping it effective on the ground and running the football. I don't know what the expectation is here. The big question mark I think many bettors will have is, what do you get from this Browns offense? Understandably so, through 2 games, week 1 against a very aggressive Cowboys front with banged up offensive line. That was a problem. Last week, they played a very good Jags front 7 that is, I think, underrated and is getting a lot of praise from film pros. This is a good Giants front 4, but this is going to be the weakest secondary and also the most passive secondary that the Giants or the Browns have faced so far in the Giants. Week 1 was a Cowboys defense that then the back end gets pretty aggressive. Last week against Jacksonville, a very man-heavy defense that plays a ton of man coverage under Ryan Nielsen. Shane Bowen last week didn't force a punt from his defense against the Washington Commanders. Washington went up and down the field. That was a game where all 7 drives got past the Giants' 27-yard line. Washington just couldn't put it into the end zone. So not only is this going to be a reprieve for the Browns' offensive line and facing pressure, but it's also going to be a reprieve from the man coverage rates that they have faced, which should allow for more space, but also more success in the ground game, which will take a burden off of the passing attack for Cleveland, which hasn't been there. There's also a chance that we get offensive line reinforcements for the Browns in this game, which would go a very long way too. And so as long as the Giants are playing this bend but don't break style to like the most extreme level, I have very little problems looking at teams like Cleveland that want to run the football, that want to have RPO work, especially coming off of games where they've played defenses that are the opposite, that may have suppressed their offensive output a little bit. I just kind of want to bet into that and back that. And so definitely a lean here for me on Cleveland at -6. Eagles on the road at the Saints. The Saints laying 2.5 points at home. Total in this game, 49.5. Wow, is this an adjustment? Is all I have to really say about this one off the start. Now, I think everybody watching the stream, if you watch me for any time, you would be expecting a lean here to the Eagles. I actually have no bet or no opinion on this game, both side and total, and I'll tell you why. So the reason I would kind of preempt that was saying like everybody's probably expecting me to be on the Eagles is in these overreaction spots where we get a team that's bumped up a lot in the ratings. It's naturally just an easy way to look to oppose and fade that. And the Saints last week were 6-point dogs at the Dallas Cowboys. In market ratings, they were rated 24th, if you're looking at unpredictable. This week, this price warrants them being rated 8th in market ratings. A jump from 24th to 8th in market ratings week over week is as extreme and substantial as you were ever going to see. Now, certainly, the Saints' offensive performance through 2 weeks warrants that. My challenge in that would be how much of week 1 becomes a bit of a throwaway playing the Carolina Panthers. Talked about that with the Chargers at the top. And then last week, how much do we actually know about the Dallas Cowboys defense? Because in week 1, the Cowboys defense got a very favorable matchup against that Browns offensive line that was beat up. That should have been the case last week, but apparently we're looking at a Saints offensive line nobody believed in coming into the season, now being top 5. But I put that Cowboys defensive comment in context because the last game that we saw Dallas play in the playoffs, they were getting embarrassed by the run game, and they were getting stretched horizontally, and offenses were just picking on them as the season came to a close, sort of culminating in that Packers game, which the Saints really exploited and employed again. And I wonder if that's just an ongoing problem for the Cowboys, that week 1 might have been kind of a false hint that they fixed. And that's still a big issue with the Cowboys. And so nobody's expecting the Saints offense to continue at this historic trajectory. And if the defensive opponents have helped and aided in that, perhaps that's kind of reason number 1 that they're getting overrated. But similar fashion to the Minnesota Vikings, where it's that surprise team and you're getting a week or two of them where it hasn't adjusted. I mean, you're looking at this and you're like, this is adjusted. Nobody could make a case that it should be adjusted more at this point with that bump in the market ratings and where we're at with this number. I also look at this just in how it's been bet recently. So the Philadelphia Eagles, 22 to, it was 21-16, 21-15. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. They had a 99% win probability on the other side of the 2-minute warning in that game against Atlanta. Prior to that game kicking off, there had been an adjustment in that game, or in this game, before the Eagles and Falcons kicked off. Hang with me here. 3.5 was the look ahead for the Eagles laying it on the road. And before the game kicked off, we knew the Saints blew out the Cowboys. That number was Eagles minus 1.5. Immediately after the Eagles blow the lead in spectacular fashion and lose on Monday Night Football, by the time I'm having my first sip of coffee on Tuesday morning, this had flipped through to 2.5 on the other side for the Saints. And so to me, that adjustment prior to the Eagles-Falcons kicking off makes sense and could have reflected what we could have seen. But I can't help but notice a lot of this adjustment now to get to the other side was kind of accelerated by that Eagles loss, which in many ways was a very phony loss for how they handled it. I mean, it's not a loss that you expect when a team has a 99% win probability that late in the fourth quarter that they are going to blow. I mean, it's not a realistic spot. And so if that has pushed this number out further, it just kind of goes to another argument to why this has been adjusted up too much. Now, with all of that said, we're kind of justifying for why the line is where it is. I have two concerns here with the Eagles that are going to keep me off. The first is that the Eagles are going to be playing the Saints defense that likes to play a lot of cover one. This is a defense that the Eagles last year struggled with. And for a long time, it was the defense that they thrived against because teams would dedicate more guys down. They'd have the one high safety, and it would be a spot where A.J. Brown would be the main focal point of the offense. He is the guy that unlocks this offense when they face a lot of cover one, which is what the Saints run primarily. A.J. Brown is not going to be playing in this game, as he's reported to miss multiple weeks. I can't help but notice how the other option that you would typically use in this spot if you're the Eagles offense would be Jalen Hurts' legs. How if that is now keyed in on by defenses and there's no A.J. Brown, that gives me worry in this specific matchup for the Eagles offense. If they don't have Brown out there, I think this becomes tough, and they won't. And so that gives me concern. And then number two, we saw the Eagles defense really struggle against the Atlanta Falcons down the stretch, and they got quite lucky by some red zone stops late in the game that kept the Falcons out, and then they blew up on that final drive. And what they were struggling with against Atlanta was the run game, was an offensive line getting a lot of push, and some of those quick passes outside stretching the boundary. And I look at what the Saints have been doing through 2 weeks with their 21 personnel, 12 personnel, and the looks they're setting up. Very much looks that the Eagles struggled with not only in week 2 against the Falcons, but week 1 against the Green Bay Packers as well. And so the main way that the Eagles could beat the Saints defense is going to be hindered by no Brown. And what they struggle with defensively is what the Saints are running and having a lot of success with. So it's a stay away for me, but I can't help notice how much this has gone up. And we have an interesting game with the Saints next week against the Atlanta Falcons, where we start to see those numbers get a little bit weird and out of line as well. Denver Broncos on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This number is currently Tampa Bay minus 6.5. Total in this game is 40. I want to give a shout out to Kevin Cole, who used to work for PFF. Now he does the Unexpected Points newsletter. He does adjusted quarterback EPA per play and goes through drops and mistakes and like a number of different categories that are out of quarterback control. And where I'm going with this is to get to a lean here on the Denver Broncos at plus 6.5, a bet that I like, as well as looking at the over here at 40. And I point out Kevin Cole because he has Baker Mayfield so far through 2 weeks with the biggest quarterback deduction from his true EPA based on a number of luck metrics that have aided Baker Mayfield and the Buccaneers offense so far through 2 weeks. And I look at this number and I can't help but think this is one that's inflated and adjusted up too far for the Buccaneers. and the Denver Broncos are getting shortchanged in this spot. So I'll kind of just push a little bit more on the Baker Mayfield stuff. So week 1, he faced the Commanders defense, which is bottom of the league, and got everything he wanted. He had a 95th percentile game, incredibly successful. Everything was working. And that really boosted up the numbers quite a bit. Last week against Detroit, he faced a secondary that's incrementally better than what he faced in Washington. Still a lot of young guys in the secondary for Detroit. He just didn't have to drop back and throw a ton of plays. But as we start to look at how many things have gone right and clicked for the Buccaneers with the throws that Mayfield has made, with their 3rd and 4th down success, starts to make the offense, which is absolutely impressive through 2 weeks, much better than expected, just seem a little bit inflated and bumped up perhaps a little bit too far. Now, defensively for Tampa Bay, I think they got very lucky last week getting 6 stops in the red zone against the Detroit Lions. The Buccaneers defense was on the field for 83 plays against Detroit. The Lions just couldn't find a way to put the ball in the end zone once they got on the other side of the Buccaneers 20. But Detroit was moving the football all game, and the Buccaneers had no answer for it. 2 problems, ton of injuries in the secondary, and now you have key injuries up front with Vita Vea and Kancey still dealing with injuries themselves. Vea suffered it last game as well. So now for the Bucs, you've got injuries up front and you've got injuries in the back. And to me, an offense that is getting a little bit fortunate with the quarterback. Do you see that big deduction again outlined by Kevin Cole for how much he's kind of been luck-aided so far through 2 weeks, and those defensive injuries, and you're at home with a number that's been adjusted up, laying this many points? That's not a recipe for success. The Denver Broncos through 2 weeks have just had a hellacious intro to a rookie quarterback taking over an offense. You're going into Lumen to take on Mike McDonald in week 1, as bad of a spot as there can be. And then in week 2, you're facing the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. Again, you're facing an elite defensive mind, and you're facing a top 3 defense in the league to open the season. Now you get that defense with trouble up front and trouble in the secondary. Bo Nix last game, really bad interception in the end zone. I think shortchanged a bit for some of the passing numbers he put up versus what was put up on the scoreboard. I look at this and it's just, to me, a number too big for the Bucs. So I think we see the Broncos have their best offensive game of the season. I think they do their part to contribute to this total. And I think the Buccaneers do enough to contribute too. And so I think this is a higher scoring game than expected, but a game that the Broncos stay competitive in, and their offense looks better, and they're able to stay within the touchdown margin. Green Bay on the road at the Tennessee Titans. Titans 2.5-point favorites. Total here 36.5. This is a tough one. Lean here would certainly be to Tennessee, but Matt LaFleur scares me in this game when I'm looking at Titans 2.5. So the logic here for me and why I would get to that initial lean would be the Packers are very likely to start Malik Willis in this game. I'm not buying the Jordan Love starting in this spot. News and rumors that are swirling around. But to me, is like you're getting the Titans at home with 2 really good defensive tackles on the D-line that's been great against the run, that just stymied the Jets offense on the ground. And they're facing a Packers offense that ran the ball 54 times. I saw clips comparing the Packers offense to the 1987 Dennison offense. Like it was amazing to watch what LaFleur pulled out. But like, okay, there's the quirk and there's the surprise. What are they doing in week 2 as an encore? I don't know what you're going to get, but if there is a coach to find something and throw a curveball, I think LaFleur is near the top of the list for how great he is on a week-to-week game plan. And so that would be kind of the logic here, is what I'm looking at to lean to Tennessee. Negatives for Tennessee are obviously the offense, and there just has not been anything consistent through the first 2 weeks. Will Levis is making costly mistakes. DeAndre Hopkins is not quite 100%. He's labeled to get a full workload this week. But the Titans offense has really underwhelmed relative to preseason and August expectations. Looked amazing in the time they played starters. There was a lot of talk from fantasy circles about this pass rate over expectation spike. There was a lot of talk about Brian Callahan and his 11 personnel opening up this offense. The Titans have been below expectation for pass rate through 2 weeks. They were dead even 50-50 last week against the Jets in a game that I thought they certainly had opportunities to pass a little bit more once the Jets lost Mosley. The Jets didn't have Reed. There were certainly opportunities there, but it seems like the Titans offense is really being limited by Will Levis, and that gives me a little bit of concern. So definitely lean to the Titans here, but I just wonder what LaFleur does, and if there's a guy who's going to pull out an encore, it's certainly him. So that would give me a little bit of hesitation. We're at the half an hour mark. We stopped by Starbucks for the venti iced shaken espresso. It's got a guy moving here. So I'm taking a sip, and I'll catch up with some of the comments here as we're have a lot of folks here in the channel. Want to get to a little bit more up-tempo previews to get everybody through these quicker than usual and kind of support the YouTube algorithm with getting into it quickly. So I appreciate everybody stopping by. If you're wondering why fewer questions are being answered, I'll get to these in just a second. And so just want to say hello to a few folks here. James says, no A.J. Brown for the Eagles. That really hurts. Yes, absolutely agree with that. That is going to be a big blow for sure. We have everybody calling out the revenge games as usually. It cracks me up. We have a Daniil Hunter revenge game. We have a Grenard revenge game. Everything's being chucked around as revenge games. Makes me laugh really well. Connor Frazier says, great Roman nugget. I do think that familiarity matters quite a bit. Jets Pete points out Harbaugh started the stay east trend. He's a master at this. That was with the board game comment. I thought was great from a coach perspective as well. And so that's a good note there from Jets Pete. Lots of comments about the Jets. Connor, I believe you're in the area. If I'm not mistaken, I would not expect that NYJ crowd to be the same as last year's opener. September 11th plus Rogers' first start made that crowd extra raucous. I had a comment on the podcast, which airs every morning on Apple and Spotify, as well as here on the YouTube channel. And I was mentioning how difficult the stadium is to get to, and I think that would be heightened in a Thursday workday traffic as well. It is the home opener, and I do think it matters, but I certainly get the sentiment there where it can be perhaps a little bit difficult to get to or reach. So we'll see how that shows up and looks at it. Sean says, are you still optimistic about Philadelphia's offense? Ranked 16th in yards per play versus average defense. Why does Sirianni take blame for the throw on third down when Moore calls the plays? Usually those decisions, go for it, not clock stuff, comes from the head coach, Sean. So I think that was definitely a Sirianni dictation of what type of player situation to run. Had a lot of reaction and talk about this. I think the pass call was the right decision. You're playing to win the game. Everyone says you're playing against the clock. You're playing to win a game. And if you were looking at that as your star running back having a wide open catch against the linebacker where the Falcons stacked 9 guys in the box on 3rd and 3, he catches it, you win the game, and it's over. Don't know what more you could ask for from the Eagles. It's easy to look back and say they handled the clock in the wrong way, but I was looking at that as a play call that had the guy you want to catch the ball wide open. It was just a mistake by Barkley. And so I'm not overreacting. I'm still high on the Eagles offense. I think once they get Brown back, we're going to see that offense get to a much higher level. Chad says, I wonder if Denver can score enough. I think this will be the best we've seen the Broncos offense so far through the season. Connor says those ice shaken espressos are great. I assume that is what the fire implicates. Could also be good. Completely agree with that. If you're enjoying the preview so far, the subscribe button is down below. If it's your first time here, if you want to hit the thumbs up and the like button, would appreciate that as well. Please keep the comments coming in as we keep going with the games. Carolina on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. Raiders 5.5-point favorites. Total 40.5 in this game. No opinion on the current number at 5.5 and 40.5. This was a game, obviously, when the news of Bryce Young being benched, Andy Dalton starting, you would have loved to grab Carolina. This is a spot where the Raiders come back after a big win, and nothing that they are saying this week implies to me like they are a team that is capable of going out and covering a big number, even if it is against this Panthers defense, which looks absolutely horrendous through 2 weeks. But this is not a Raiders team off a big win, laying a big number that I would ever want to bet on. The question is, can you trust anything that the Carolina Panthers are doing, even with Andy Dalton starting? And at 5.5, I would say that decision is pushed to a brink. When it was earlier in the week, and you were looking at 7 or 6.5, sure. To me, this has come in a little bit, and it's just not a bet that I would want to make at 5.5, but I could never bet the Raiders. And to expand on what I'm saying with the Raiders not wanting to cover the number. So Antonio Pierce in the post-game presser, in the early week presser, and I'm sure in the Wednesday presser coming up today, as well as the Thursday presser, as well as the Friday presser, is going to continue to reinforce the fact that he wants Zamir White to have at least 20 carries in this game. I mean, rather than celebrating the win against the Ravens, he made the press conference about how much he wants to run the football. And he's like, we're getting away from the run game. We got to keep running the football. The run game's the identity of our team. We want to get White involved. We want to keep, I'm like, you just beat the Ravens on the road, throwing it 38 times, targeting Brock Bowers and Devontae Adams, and Pierce post-game is pushing the run. So it's very clear and evident, if we're going off of what happened last year, when he was putting the same tone around Josh Jacobs, that this is something he wants and something that the Raiders are going to do. It's something the Chargers were able to do against the Panthers. It's something that the Saints were able to do against the Panthers. And I think it's something the Raiders are going to be able to do against the Panthers as well. But when I hear run rates like that and wanting to run the football and wanting to feature Zamir White, and I look and it's a team laying this big of a number that typically does not with that style of play, that's not a recipe for success in covering a number, even if it is the Carolina Panthers. So, unfortunately, 5.5, stay away from me, but I could never, ever, ever bet the Raiders in this spot, laying 5.5 at home. The question is, can you trust Andy Dalton to do anything for this Panthers offense? Miami on the road at Seattle. Seahawks 4.5-point favorites with a total in this game of 41. I like the Dolphins quite a bit earlier in the week. 4.5, I think, is a fair number. That was what I was thinking. I thought we were going to get 4.5 as an inflated overreaction to the loss of Tua and Skylar Thompson starting. We saw 6.5, and it didn't last. Similar to Carolina in this spot, I would never be looking to bet Seattle here at -4.5. But I think the numbers come into a fair point where you're not getting a lot here relative to what the number should be with Miami. I think this game is very close to being priced correctly. I would have a small lean to the over here at 41 at the current prices. So Seattle went into New England without Kenneth Walker and with a banged-up offensive line, and we saw Ryan Grubb completely flip the game plan and had Geno throw it 44 times against a very good New England secondary. It was the second most pass attempts for a game in Geno's career, and it really showed what this Seahawks offense can be when it's opened up and allowed to operate how, in my opinion, would be an optimal way. And even with 5 drops really taking away from the Seahawks numbers, it was damn impressive what Geno and the Seahawks offense did and looked like against that Patriots defense in Foxborough. If that is the Seahawks offense that we get as long as Kenneth Walker is out and as long as the offensive line is dealing with some injuries and they're letting Geno navigate pressure, which he's doing phenomenally. He's been pressured 27 times. He's only taken 4 sacks. I mean, he's been working wonders in the pocket. If we get, not even if we get that Seahawks offense, if we get a glimpse of that again this game, that offense cannot play in games totaled at 41. Now, it closed against New England at 38.5, and it was a drastic game plan. It ended up going over, even with the second half falling off a cliff for points and offensive efficiency. It has to be higher if that's going to be the offense that Seattle can operate going forward. Now, again, Miami, similar to New England, isn't viewed as being a great partner for the over, which I believe is why we're seeing this total a little bit shorter. And obviously, we have a big drop here from 47 to 41 on the news that Tua will not be starting at quarterback. He's now on IR, and it's going to be Skylar Thompson. I don't know if we can compare this game to week 1, which a lot of folks are doing, because I think Skylar Thompson is much more equipped to handle the spot and the situation going into Seattle and playing at Lumen than Bo Nix was with the Broncos. And we're effectively looking at the same price, which I don't necessarily understand or get, because to me, Skylar Thompson has been in the system for a couple of years and is much more equipped to handle spots. It's not as drastic and new of a game plan for Mike McDonald. He already has experience, and the playmakers that Miami have are night and day to what the Denver Broncos have. The New England Patriots beat up Seattle in the middle of the field as they're dealing with a couple of guys banged up in that area of the defense. And I would expect that McDaniel, off extra time to prep and figure things out, is going to come forward with a much better game plan than what he had against the Buffalo Bills on the short week. And so to me, I would lean here to the over at 41. Unfortunately, we don't get the Dolphins here as a bigger dog. That would have been great earlier in the week, but now I think it's close, price close to correct. This is a great game as we're looking. Detroit -2.5 on the road at Arizona. Total 52.5. We released the over at 51. I would still look over here at 52.5, no question. I think this is a game that's going to be wide open. I think this is a game where we see Arizona play to their fullest extent in the shootout team that they were expected to be and have been so far. And I think that we see the Lions and Ben Johnson get things right in this spot after arguably botching things the first 2 weeks a little bit. So we've talked about it now for the 2 previews we've done so far to this point. Let's talk about it again for a third preview. How do you beat the Arizona Cardinals? You line up in heavier personnel, you run the football, and you force them to commit to the run, and then you open up the pass game downfield. It is exactly what the Buffalo Bills did in week 1. It's exactly what the Buffalo Bills executed on in week 1, and they scored 34 points. That is what the Lions did to the Rams in overtime. It's the core of what the Lions do and do well. You think about the Lions and where they're built strongest. It's the offensive line. It's getting bigger bodies in there. It's the run game duo between Montgomery and Gibbs. That is where the Lions live and excel and have a ton of success. They got away from it against the Buccaneers because Ben Johnson identified that the Buccaneers have so many defensive injuries, especially in the secondary. They had Jared Goff throw it 55 times. I don't expect Jared Goff to throw it anywhere close to that. I expect the Lions to have a much more run-focused attack behind that O-line, and then Goff to be selective when needed to be with deeper shots down the field. I think this is an easy game for the Lions offense to scheme up a plan of attack that will work. And even in the inefficiencies that they have showed with some of the decision-making in weeks 1 and 2, the one constant has been that they've gone at the weakness of opponents. And I think that that's something you can trust the Lions to do. On the other side for the Arizona Cardinals, the question is, how do you stop this offense? Because Arizona on offense wants to line up in 12 and 13 personnel. They want to bash James Conner into the defensive front. They want to mix in Benson when needed. And when defenses overcommit and tend to play a lot of man coverage, you have these big body wide receivers outside with an elite tight end in space. Do you take advantage of? And we saw Marvin Harrison opened up last week. You have Trey McBride, who's just deadly in matchups. And I look at the Lions defense, and I mean, what do? It's exactly the weaknesses for Detroit where the Arizona Cardinals want to attack. And the Lions' biggest strength is that pass rush up front and stopping the run. But the Cardinals have proven that these bigger bodies they're bringing in and the heavier formations they're operating out of does a very good job to negate that. And so I think the Lions are going to be better up front against the run than the competition the Cardinals have faced in week 1 and 2. But this is a spot where Arizona's probably forced into passing it a little more than they have and a little more than expected, targeting those younger corners and the Lions backfield that are going to be put in man coverage. And I think they're going to have a ton of success doing it as well. To me, this is an indoor game in Arizona that is going to fly over the total. And I think we're only seeing this at the same price of what we saw last week because of how that game finished, 20-16 against the Buccaneers. But that was a game where the Lions were consistently in the red zone. So that was a bit of a misleading result in its own right that maybe is keeping this down a little bit. But the Cardinals are a shootout team every week. The Lions can play to that. Both of these offenses, I think, go pretty crazy in this game in Arizona. Baltimore laying 1 on the road at Dallas with a total of 48.5. To me, this is the hardest game to bet and handicap of the entire week. I have no opinion on the side. I have no opinion on the total. And I don't know what to make of either of these teams, quite frankly, at this point. The Cowboys last week completely shocked me with their no-show against the Saints. The pass rush was non-existent against the Saints offensive line that had questions coming into the year. Don't know what to make of that at all. After being dominant in week one, completely no-show and get against the Saints and just get embarrassed. And I don't know what to make of the Cowboys, because there was that very clear data point against the Packers in the playoffs that looked like a problem. And then everything was righted in the opposite in week one against Cleveland. And it's like we're back to that point coming out of the playoffs, coming into this year with this Cowboys defense. I don't know what to make of it. I don't know how to handicap it. I don't know what we're getting from it at all. And that makes this one really, really tough. And on the other side, it's the Ravens. On one hand, you can look at being an inch away from having a 2-pointer to win against the Chiefs when not a lot of things went right for 4 quarters. That's the best team in football in Kansas City. And that is the Ravens being right there at the end of the game in a spot where, quite frankly, they had the O-line issues. Mark Andrews was not healthy. They still couldn't figure out a way to get Derrick Henry. But again, right there at the end of it. And then against the Raiders, you're in a 80% win probability state later in the fourth quarter and you blow that lead. I know the Ravens are 0-2, very close to being 2-0. And so it's like, how do you end up rating and handicapping this Ravens team coming in? And so I don't know what to make of either of these teams, and I don't want to go too in depth with anything because it's very likely wrong, because I don't know on either of these two teams. And so this game is a pass for me. I don't know. This is a tough one and a tough matchup. And even when it comes to like learning what we're going to get from either side here, I have no idea. And so I'm completely stumped and taken out of this game. Don't know. San Francisco -7.5 on the road at the Los Angeles Rams. Total here 43.5. San Francisco above the 7. I'm looking at this game. Above the 7 would lean to above the 7.5. Let me try to get it out in one sentence. Above the 7.5, I would lean to Los Angeles at home in this spot. No opinion on the total at 43.5. The reason I would look to LA in this game is simply because we're going to see a McVay curveball that I think is similar to the LaFleur curveball, which completely caught the Indianapolis Colts off guard in week 2. And anytime you get play callers in these situations where you don't know what's coming and you don't know what you're going to get, I think it puts the opposing team in such a bind, even with so much familiarity. This is going to be a big curveball game from the Rams at home. And there were some hints at it so far this week in the pressers where Sean McVay was talking about how without Kupp and without Nakua, they're going to have to go away from the 11 personnel and do something different. And we've never really seen McVay pushed into a spot like this where he had to shift up and he had to throw in different formations and he had to do something really different. And in that Sunday nighter against the Lions, we saw when McVay was pushed into a pretty dire spot where it was simply just Kupp and Stafford behind that offensive line. I mean, he schemed up just a genius game plan. There's no question about it. I don't know what's coming in this game. There's hints that it's going to be different. He does get a little bit of reinforcements up front on the offensive line. Left tackle back from suspension of Havenstein at right tackle. So the offensive line, I don't think, is going to be as bad as what we saw last week against the Cardinals. And that might free him up to have a little bit more freedom in what he wants to do. This number has taken off. Was 4.5 on the look ahead. We are now on the other side of 7. I think it's a big reaction to what we saw from the Rams in week 2. And the 49ers are not going to be at 100% health. You don't have Deebo Samuel for this game. Brandon Ayuk still not appearing to be 100%. Obviously, no McCaffrey. Jordan Mason, I thought, was less effective than what we saw against the Jets, against the Vikings. And you have Nick Bosa, who's dealing with the lower body injury. His status unclear for this game as well. If that is something that turns into an injury that forces him to miss, I would consider that kind of a bonus to where we're looking at this game right now as it stands on Wednesday morning. But that would obviously alleviate some of the pressure up front on this offensive line. And to me, just the Rams at home on the other side of 7 with the game plan that's going to be tough for Shanahan to potentially look at and Sorensen to look at. You don't know what's coming. the added importance of this being a division game on top of the Rams 0-2 and how this would effectively count for like 1.5 losses, so to speak. This just seems like a big number for the 49ers to go on the road and cover in a spot with so many question marks about what you're going to get from the Rams offense. This to me just seems like it could line up to be an all-time McVay game for what he's able to scheme up and show. Kansas City on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Sunday Night Football. Chiefs 3.5-point favorites. Total in this game 46.5. This is a game that has been adjusted from 4.5 down to 3.5 on the Falcons win and the Chiefs' narrow escape. But I look at both of these teams as really escaping their week 2 games with wins when both very well should have been losses. The total in this game has come down a little bit from open as well. Interesting thing when you look at this is really a question of what are the Chiefs going to become now that they don't have Isaiah Pacheco and now that they know they're not having Hollywood Brown back possibly for the duration of the season. And you don't have Clyde Edwards-Helaire back. They go and they add Kareem Hunt, who's not obviously going to be 100% coming into this game. And then you have Steele as the young running back in the backfield. But for me, the Chiefs now with these injuries are going to take on a different offense. And we haven't yet seen that deep downfield passing attack that was raved about and commented on by every single person all offseason, that was pushed by the players for Kansas City, that was pushed by the media. I mean, everybody kind of believed it coming into the season, but you still had this very effective ground game that you could lean on if you're the Chiefs. Now, that's taken away and that's eliminated. And what I wonder is, does this force the Chiefs into being much more pass heavy? Does this force the Chiefs into really pushing those downfield shots? I would think yes. I think we're going to see a Chiefs offense that looks very different from what we saw in weeks 1 and 2. And I think this is going to be a Chiefs offense that it sounds crazy, but is taken on a lot more by Patrick Mahomes in the passing game. And he goes up against the Falcons defense that I'm not sure matches up very well against it. And so to me, this is a game that we might see the beginning of the Chiefs being started to price differently until they figure out that run game solution without Pacheco. But his injury to me almost has a domino effect on this offense that's going to kind of trickle through. And I like to look at the Chiefs here laying 3.5 on the road just on the heels of that as a lean that I would have in this game to the Chiefs. Defensively for Kansas City, I think Chris Jones can be an absolute game wrecker in this spot. The Atlanta Falcons face no pressure against the Philadelphia Eagles whatsoever. And Kirk Cousins got very comfortable in the pocket. If Jones can upset this Falcons offensive line and get in the backfield, I think we're really going to see Cousins tested. And I think that, again, is going to have a bit of an effect over the course of the offense like we saw to an extent in week 1. What's interesting about Kansas City is if you look where they've kind of been beat up, it was the Bengals operating out of that 11.5 personnel without Higgins on the field. Gesicki had a really big game. The corners for Kansas City are playing solid. Can the Falcons finally get Kyle Pitts involved in a big way to take on the middle of this Chiefs defense? I think it's something they're going to have to figure out a way to do. And against the Eagles, there were some of those shots to secondary receivers where they did end up finding success over the middle of the field. So I think that's an interesting note too, but it's only going to work if this Falcons O-line has an answer for Chris Jones, which I don't know if they do. Another thing that I would kind of put out there, if you're looking at betting the total in this game at 46.5, the Falcons a lot of the time against the Eagles, not talking the final drive in the fourth quarter, or even the second to last drive, but first 3 quarters, the Falcons showed a lot of up-tempo and hurry-up offense. And they were getting to the line very quickly. They had a time per play of around 27 seconds going into the later part of the third quarter, getting to the line very quickly, snapping it very quickly. If you get some of that Falcons tempo and you get the Chiefs throwing the football more than expected because of the issues in the ground game, and you're looking at a total that has been bet down since open, I don't know if I'm getting to that. If you're just looking at kind of pure closing lines to what you're getting to, the total here is 47. If you're looking at market ratings preseason, it's 47. I don't know if either of those are factoring in just kind of the hints that we've seen from the Falcons over the last couple of quarters for their tempo. And I don't know if it's certainly factoring in the Chiefs and their likelihood to be throwing the football a lot more in this game either. So I would definitely lean to the over here at 46.5. Jacksonville on the road at the Buffalo Bills. Bills laying 5 points. Total here 45.5. No opinion on the total. Similar to the Miami Dolphins, as well as similar to the Carolina Panthers. This is a game where I could never be looking at betting Buffalo, but the dog has been bet a little bit. So what would have earlier in the week been a strong look for me to Jacksonville is now just a very slim opinion at +5 in this game. And I just look at week 1 and where the Bills closed against the Arizona Cardinals. They closed as a 6-point home dog in their home opener, getting the at the time unknown Arizona Cardinals coming into Buffalo. And this game is effectively pricing the Jags very close to similar to that Arizona team that was in a much different scenario week 1 coming into Buffalo. And I just don't agree with that. I think the Jags in their current form, it becomes a bit of a different debate, but shouldn't warrant a price point that is lower on the road in Buffalo than the Arizona Cardinals. I just don't buy that. And I get that there's been offensive struggles for the Jags, but to me, the weapons and the personnel is warranting a price point that should be higher. And we're at that point now at -5, which is why that opinion goes down. But still, like, I don't know how you could justify betting the Bills unless you get to a cheap 4 in this scenario. And so 5 carries very little weight from the key number perspective. So it's a game where I'm going to kind of waffle back and forth. But the long and short of it is look to the Jags. Could not bet Buffalo here unless the price was much lower. I think the Jags defensive front is something that's going a little bit under the radar. Every single film column that I read from pro analysts that watch film, that have very good opinions that I respect, they really like this Jags defensive front. I think that that's something that when I look at the Bills offense, it was not tested against the Arizona Cardinals. And then the Dolphins in the state that they were in was not really tested as well. And I think that that's going to be a bit of a step up in class for what the Bills are facing from what they want to do on offense, and may force them to push the ball outside a little bit more, which is something that we just haven't seen the Bills kind of forced into doing. Because against Arizona, they just ran the football all day. They didn't need to change. And then last week against Miami, those turnovers in short fields they were set up in just allowed them to operate from a very comfortable game state all game. In this spot, I think that's going to look a little bit different. And from the Jags offensive perspective, like, when did the Bills defensive injuries start to pile up here? You lost Milano in the preseason. You lost Bernard. You lose your best linebacker in the middle against the Miami Dolphins, the heart of the defense, the captain of the defense. I just, if not now for Jacksonville, when is kind of when I'm looking at this. I mean, it's a dire scenario with the way that the season has trended. They blow the lead against Miami where they're comfortable late in the game. The goal line fumble cost them. They just stumble all over themselves against the Cleveland Browns at home in an ugly rain game. If not now, when for the Jags? And to me, this is a number adjusted up, not nearly as much as it was earlier in the week, but still, I think, a touch inflated for the Buffalo Bills. Washington on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Monday night doubleheader. Bengals 7.5-point favorites, total 48. Definite look here for me to the Washington Commanders getting 7.5 points on the road. Cincinnati defensively has so many issues, and this is going to be a problem for them all season long. They're down now personnel on the defensive line, which couldn't stop the run in the first 2 games. They're dealing with a secondary that is not nearly as good as what they've had in seasons past. Lou Anarumo and his game planning week to week does not initially seem to be effective as it has been in seasons past. I mean, this is a Bengals defense that is just constantly getting downgraded for me through the first 2 weeks. I've seen nothing from them that impresses me, and I see issues up front that teams continue to exploit. Before Pacheco went down with the injury, was nearly at 100 yards. The Chiefs had other runners that were adding to that. They had no issues running the football. In week 1, New England ran all over them. That was not an offense that was touted very highly at all. And now Washington comes off of a game Yes, easy opponent against the New York Giants, but I think the Washington Commanders come out of that Giants game on offense just wildly underrated. They didn't punt for 4 quarters against the Giants, but they only put up 21 points because they couldn't get the ball in the end zone. Washington has had a big issue this season targeting outside wide receivers. It got a little bit better against the Giants. Week 1, they only had 5 or 6 attempts to wide receivers outside. It was all running backs and tight ends. In week 2, it was spread out a little bit more. But against Cincinnati, they can go right back to that and dominate the middle of the field and rely on Robinson in the run game, rely on Jaden Daniels' legs, rely on targeting the middle of the field and pushing it. It feels like a matchup against this Bengals team that is going to be very comfortable for them. And I look at this number that's getting bet out and pushed out in a pretty big way. And I just don't agree with the Commanders being downgraded at all. The Bengals have a chance to get T. Higgins back on an outside chance. That would be a big boost to their offense, which against this Commanders secondary could absolutely be problematic. That's a big negative when looking at this. But to me, asking this Bengals defense to be competitive enough, even against the Commanders, yes, even against the Commanders, asking them to be competitive enough to keep this number inside more than the touchdown is a big ask that I just do not think they have the personnel to do at the moment. So I look to the dog here, Washington at 7.5. Hour just over, an hour and 1 minute, was very, very close. Lots of comments coming into the chat, lots of comments as well. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. Appreciate everybody for joining into the chat as well. If you have any questions or comments after the video as well, you can leave them down below. If you heard anything in this video that made you think about a team differently, maybe got you encouraged to bet a side or a total, would love if you hit the subscribe button or give the thumbs up to the video down below. I continue to try to get these better and better as we do every week, get them quicker and more concise to give everybody the best info possible. So if you've been enjoying them, would love to see that appreciation with a thumbs up or a comment down below. If you're interested in following along with more releases, we could very well have more this week over at raspicks.com/NFL. I would not be surprised to see maybe one more go out today. There's options for any duration that you might be interested in following along with those releases. Quick question before I went out. I got a question about the Survivor. The most popular Survivor game this week, I would assume, would probably be, would it be Cincinnati as the most popular Survivor leg? I think folks would probably agree with that. Maybe San Francisco. I would never touch San Francisco in Survivor. I would not touch Cincinnati in Survivor. I would never touch Tampa Bay in Survivor. I know that's going to be another bigger favorite that gets brought up. Perhaps the Jets as a Thursday game, or if you're looking for a Sunday game specifically and you don't want to go with the Jets, I would look at the Chiefs at 3.5 would be my choice if you're looking at it. That would be how I go with that. Cleveland, yes, I miss Cleveland in that. Cleveland would be another alternative. I'm guessing the use case, again, I'm not a Survivor pro. I don't do the matrices. I don't do the charts. I don't like contests. I'm not good at contests. They're not something I play and follow. You guys know that by now. I'm guessing there's a strategic element where the Browns in this spot at the price point would be advantageous because you're not looking at using them down the road like you would with the Chiefs. My initial thought to that would be, does everyone else see that and notice that and take the Browns too? I don't know how that typically is distributed. I'm guessing the Chiefs would not be used very much. I do think the Browns win and cover in that game at home. So I get it. But I'm guessing that you could probably look at the Chiefs here as a shorter price and dodge or set yourself up to dodge a lot of those games that are going to be very popular. I don't know though. It's not my thing. So that's kind of how I look at it. Carlos says, thanks, Adam. Looking for a little normality this weekend. Been an odd first 2 weeks. It definitely has. This week feels like, from the sides perspective, I gave out a lot of leans. There's still one or two that we might still act on from a release perspective. I didn't fully talk about, but from just looking at the sides and the movement on the games, this feels like as you mentioned, Carlo, like more of a normal week where things were a little bit more straightforward. Week 1 and 2 were definitely lots of buyback, lots of just blind number grabbing, lots of bigger numbers with low totals that you couldn't tell if they were true positions or just being taken because of where they were bet to. A lot of that this week seems and feels and looks and is acting like a lot more of a normal week. And so that's probably why you hear a little bit more conviction in my voice. Sounds a little bit more normal with some of the looks that I have. I think that's how it kind of shapes up. And these are the weeks that I have a similar feel to weeks in the past seasons over the last 15 years where I've done well. This feels like one of those weeks where just the way that I handicap and look at things lines up better than perhaps it did in week 1 or 2. So I saw comments about things sounding different, and I think that's kind of showing through as well. Preston asked, what's your media schedule for the rest of the week? Megapod with Gil tomorrow. Have the Sam P video tomorrow as well. The Simple Handicap airs every day here on the YouTube channel, as well as Apple and Spotify every single morning. And then I have Follow the Money. That is 2:30 Pacific PM on Friday for half an hour with Mitch and Paulie. And so that's what's going on for the rest of the week. One other question that I had, and I saw this during the Sunday recap, and I thought it was a good question, but just because there's so many games with these 16 slate cards, I'm trying to do more game focus and get through these quicker. Next week, once the buys start next week, or maybe one more week after with 17. Once the buys start, there's more freedom for questions and kind of pausing and starting and stopping. But Sunday, there was a good question, and it said, like, why do you look at red zone success, and why do you think it's predictive, and why do you go to this level of the box scores? And it wasn't like a hate and a jabbing comment. It was curiosity. And so I think the best way to answer that, and I wish the fellow who asked the question was in the chat and they could kind of reframe it this week as well. The reason that I think that is important and looking at the box score is important is because the NFL the numbers are really keyed into 3, 6, and 7, but also it's a very reactionary league where you see a lot of games moving on a week-to-week basis from where markets would have them, and it gets them to a point where you're kind of deciding, has it gone too far? Has it not moved enough? And the best way to evaluate that in a very simple context is to try strip away all of the noise from games that were played, because you see games flip so quickly after the Sunday results come in, and you're kind of looking at two teams in a very different level. And it's always a question of like, what happened in that game to either push that number out that far or to justify that it should go further. And an easy way to do that is like what happened in the red zone, where teams like Detroit, for instance, consistently driving and just not getting the luck go their way inside the red zone, where teams benefiting from turnovers like Minnesota that set up a lot of short fields, where teams finding big plays like Minnesota on 97-yard touchdowns. Like, what things happened that are not typically repeatable in the next week, either from a performance or from a luck perspective? And red zone variance is something that varies in a big way week to week and is very luck driven. There's oftentimes turnovers are the same way, specifically on the takeaway side. It's very hard to replicate takeaways. And so if that's fueling your offense, that might make a team look worse. And so you're just trying to strip away all these different things and be like, how can you get to just like the cleanest explanation for how a team played one week to use against overreactions in the next week? And so when you hear me talking about all those things, it's always in an effort to try get to just the least noisy representation of a team to then price a point spread or a total. And that's why that happens. And it might sound repetitive week to week, but as the season goes on, you'll see kind of like patterns that emerge to where teams become over or undervalued because of all those things, because of the schedule they play. Are they playing a lot of over teams or under teams? Are they playing a lot of inflated teams or undervalued teams? And you just kind of always try to take that away to get to a point where you're making the best decision possible on that. And so that's why it continues to get brought up, and that's why it continues to look like that as well. So that'll do it for me on this week 3 preview. I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Appreciate everybody for stopping by. Have a fantastic week. Have a fantastic weekend. And I'll be back with you guys every morning here on the YouTube channel and Apple and Spotify with new episodes of the podcast.